Hello and welcome to this discussion with Dr. Partha Ghosh on leadership and the challenges that future leaders will face in today's technologically advanced and increasingly complex world. My name is Alex McKay, and I am a program manager at BAE Systems, which is a defense company focused on protecting those who protect us. I currently manage a production line for thermal camera cores, as well as development programs that work to advance the technology around thermal imaging. I'm working on my engineering master's through Tufts University Gordon Institute. And for my capstone project, I'm exploring the topic of different leadership models and how leaders today are adapting to those changes. Today, I'm talking with my capstone project advisor, Dr. Partha Ghosh, who is a world-renowned thought leader, problem solver, futurist, and inspirer in the field of business and technology, as well as economic and leadership development. He has a wide range of other interests, ranging from science to philosophy to philanthropy. And for the past 4 decades, he has been a former partner at McKinsey and Company, as well as a leader of his own firm, Partha S Ghosh at Associates. He has served heads of businesses in multiple nations, worked with governments on significant strategic and organization issues, and led more than 100 leadership development workshops in over 30 countries. His clients view him as a creative problem solver and visionary leader, and he is also an avid public servant, proud to be involved with multiple philanthropic initiatives around the world, including being one of the founding members of the Boston Pledge. He is establishing a new school titled Partha S Ghosh Leadership Academy at the Indian Institute of Technology in Kharagpur, India. The school integrates Eastern and Western wisdom to provide students as well as senior executives with the opportunity to uncover their inner powers to influence positive outcomes on society. Welcome, Dr. Ghosh. How are you today?
Good. Thank you.
Good. All right. So I'm just going to jump right in. So the first question that I have for you is kind of just to lay the groundwork. So how do you define leadership and what does it mean to you?
First, thank you, Alex, for organizing this session. I think that at a very basic level, I believe leadership is a choice that people make to take responsibility towards a higher level purpose. It is an act of determination. And leadership also, I believe, rests on responsibility and full acceptance of responsibility. So leadership is about then determination. It is an action, it is a continuous process, and it is about taking responsibility. In that spirit, I do believe the great leaders that I have admired over time, they have the spirit, if it is to be, it is up to me. So in other words, they take full responsibility. But when I step back a little bit and think of leadership of people like Mother Teresa on one side, Bill Gates, Thomas Edison, George Washington, there's a whole spectrum of leaders we have seen. They have very different personas, but that also tells me it is a very complex chemistry of decisions, actions, image, communication with people, verbal, nonverbal, as to how they connect. So it reminds me of once I read about Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker wrote leadership. The essence of leadership is what we do 98% of our time is communication. And I think that's a very powerful message. Communication, not only verbal, but nonverbal, so that you can bring people together towards a higher level purpose. So I think it really captures what leadership is all about. But one thing I do want to emphasize that there is a fundamental difference between what makes a good manager versus good leader. And unfortunately, what I see these days, people who succeed as managers, they're all of a sudden expected to play leadership roles, but without the proper intervention of some kind of a training or mentoring. Because as you know, managers rely on control. They are in the what I would call in a hierarchical mode. They are people, they order, they command, things gets done. But leaders do not rely on control. They inspire trust. They motivate people. The managers focus on the bottom line. The leaders focus on the horizon beyond. So there are some fundamental differences. Managers manage status quo, leaders challenge the status quo, and they bring up new dimensions. So indeed, there are fundamental differences. What managers do, what leaders are expected to do, they're definitely not extension of better and the same of the manager. So that's something I would really like to underscore. So when I go deeper into the subject, it's a very deep question, Alex, that leaders I have come across, and I've been very fortunate being in the profession of management consulting, having worked with leaders around the world, from Japan to California, from Sweden to Australia. And what I've seen that the leaders, particularly the ones I have admired, they have a very deep sense of self, understanding the inner self. As a result, I think they exhibit a higher degree of what I would call self-confidence, selflessness. They are for others to serve. While visionary, they work with profound purpose, yet with high degree of humility and grounded in reality. So you can be visionary, that doesn't mean you're not in touch with the reality. And being able to connect the dots from vision plane to the reality plane is what leaders do very well. So there is, I personally feel, a spiritual vector where it is beyond your intellectual capacity. Your spiritual capacity allows you to do so. Where I kind of remember Queen Elizabeth I, as you know, she was the one who was triggered the development of the British Empire. And she, in one of her speeches, made a beautiful statement, very simple statement. She said, "It is in the being, not in the seeming. Maybe we wish the best." And what it really means to me, that how you live your life in the being and capture the attention of people, motivate people, is what is important, not how you look. But she was a bit frail. She was quite slim. So she said, "It doesn't matter how I look. And I'm a woman." Those days we were living in a world of kings. But then she was humble enough to say, maybe we wish the best, that we have to try hard, but there is always a divine force at work, which has to also come into play. So to add to that, I add, not only it is in the being, but it is also in the becoming. Leadership is a continuous development process, and definitely not in the seeming. And maybe we wish the best. I do believe it is a humility that is very important, because in a world of knowledge, which we might discuss later, that unless I'm open-minded, unless I'm humble, I would never learn. If I don't learn, I do not earn the right to earn the trust of others. And unless I earn the trust, I'm not a leader. So humility is perhaps at the core. So finally, I would like to share with you the way I have defined leadership. I do have a definition which I say leadership is a human fine art. It's a very fine art that uncovers through that art the inner courage and guides the forces of self-expression of individuals that you're working with, of an organization, of a society, of a nation, of a civilization, towards a higher level purpose and towards a superordinate meaning. So the scope could be just your family, it could be your peers, it could be a company, it could be your community, it could be a society, it could be a nation, it could expand. And everyone doesn't begin with changing the civilization, but as you go through this process of expanding the scope of your reach, you become a greater and greater leader. So that's where I would like to kind of end on my definition of leadership, because it is a complex chemistry. But one thing I always feel, that great leaders motivate people in their presence towards a higher level meaning, towards a spirit of excellence, and ensure that spirit is sustained in their absence. That's very important. That makes the greatness, that when you are not there, that spirit continues, and the organization where you have led, the person has led, continues to prosper, continues to become more meaningful, more thought-provoking, whatever be the damage. It could be an academic institution, it could be a company, it could be a non-profit organization, it could be a government. Irrespective of that, you want to leave behind a legacy which people would celebrate for many, many years to come.
Yeah, that's great. You talked a lot about, all the qualities that make up a good leader, like visionary, communication, humility. So do you think that it has to be born with those skills, or is that something that those qualities can be developed in order to make a good leader?
That's a great question. There's a lot of debate that leaders are born, you cannot develop leadership qualities in individuals. I kind of believe it could be developed, because I do believe that God is very fair. God has given us with gifts which are deep inside our heart, deep inside our soul. And the role of the education process of any country is to help people unlock that gift. Now, unfortunately, and I want to make another point before I get to the point I was about to make, that I do believe, as you know, Alex, I do conduct a lot of leadership programs. I've done it across the world. And I do believe in 5 fundamentals. And I will explain the first 2 because that relates directly to your question. Firstly, I do believe everyone has traits of leadership. Traits of leadership. It may remain hidden. In some cases, it get uncovered and you see the leadership, but everyone has traits of leadership. Secondly, these traits manifest themselves differently in different contexts, in different individuals. The way it manifested in a person like Mother Teresa is obviously different from the way it got expressed in a person like Thomas Edison. But they are great leaders. A third is a very important point. It is a continuous process of alignment. I could be a great leader today, but if I do not align myself with the context, with the changes taking place in my ecosystem, with the people that I'm working with, obviously I will cease to be a leader. So it is a continuous process. As I said, it is an act. Fourth, effective leaders are great servants. You don't have to be a boss where you are leading hundreds of people. You serve people. In the process, people keep depending on you, people keep trusting you, and people listen to you. And in the process, you drive a movement to develop a business, movement to take your company from level A to level B. But the challenge, I think, the leadership, particularly knowledge society, would be to be able to develop. And the final point is great leaders have the ability to see greatness in others. That's what is more important. They do not necessarily believe that I am great. In fact, they are very humble. They, in fact, think not less of themselves, but they think less of them. They think more of others. So now, these are the 5 principles that I follow in my leadership programs. But the first time it directly refers to your question. I do believe everyone has traits of leadership, but they need to be cultivated. In some individuals, because of some adversity he or she has faced, or because of a big opportunity he or she has faced, they get the chance to unlock that quality. But in many others, maybe 99.9% of the individuals, that remain hidden. And I personally believe the purpose of education system is not only to impart knowledge, but is also to help the inner gift of an individual get expressed. And I don't think the education system does a good job on that. And in for the leadership programs that I conduct, fundamental focus is know thyself. Know thyself, find out what are the gifts in you, and in the process, find a way to express. So I do believe leadership could be developed.
Yeah, that's great. So you've touched on this a bit in the last two questions, but can you just clarify a little bit more about what an ideal leader looks like to you? You talked about a lot of those points, but what is that ideal leader to you?
That's a very deep question. Then I have to be careful because everyone is a leader. You are a leader, Alex, that you are conducting this session. And so the ideal leader to me, when I think of the people who have really impressed me, and I'm not saying they have to be CEOs or the prime ministers of country, though I have worked with prime ministers, presidents of countries, and CEOs of large multinationals. But many of the examples that comes to my mind are very simple, humble people who have made a difference in the lives of few people, sometimes millions. But what I've seen, the common denominator among all these individuals, as I mentioned earlier, they are great students. They're typically very humble. They know how to keep their egos outside and perhaps keep their divine within, as opposed to keeping divine in the church or the temple with a lot of egos inside. I feel it should be just the opposite. And their ability to put interests of others, interest of the environment they're working in ahead of their own interest. They're selfless. And in the process, they inspire, they motivate. They're typically more moral and ethical. That gives them the power to be trusted. But trust is a continuous process. Because once the trust is broken, it's very difficult to get back the trust. So a leader leadership is sustained over a long period and beyond his or her life, one of the most important requirements of the ideal leader is the moral, the ethical course of conduct. And then, of course, the most important part, and all of them are equally important, actually, I wouldn't say that the most important part, their ability to connect the dots which are visible, less visible, or some of them are invisible, not visible as yet, but they could see it. That's the power of intuition, that they could sense something in the horizon, then connect the visible, the invisible, and less visible dot to find patterns. I think these are I would say, are the fundamental requirements of an ideal leader. But one thing I would like to emphasize, Alex, given that you are working on a very important project for the world, I would say, because you are working on leadership in the 21st century. And I would like it to be a piece of document, piece of thought process, which will bring out new insights. I'd like to make a distinction between what we see in a leader. Of course, people say leaders have charisma, they're energizing, they're inspiring, they make things happen, they move things, of course. But what is more important, where does that power come from? That is more important. Because I can tell you, I had the privilege to, when I was a young kid, I was really small, meet Mother Teresa. And I was in Calcutta, where I was born. And I have seen great leaders like Jack Welch. Once upon a time, he was called great. Now he's not considered great, but that's a different issue. But the common denominator is their ability to honor their own inner conscience, their ability to honor that inner conscience in a way that they can serve others, their sense in the process, the sense of selflessness, in the process, the sense of genuineness. Because when you are genuine and you have the selfless purpose, even if you are not a great speaker, but you actually communicate. You don't need the words. Your presence, the way you speak, the way you show your genuineness inspires people. So that, I would say, has been at the core of many great leaders that I have come across. The genuineness at the core, the standard of ethics at the core, their ability to connect with their inner conscience at the core. And that, when gets expressed, they look energizing, they look inspiring, and they look that they are connecting with people. That's what I would like to kind of particularly underscore.
Great, thank you. So as you mentioned, this project is looking at leaders and leadership in the 21st century. What are some of the big challenges that you think leaders are facing today?
That's a what I would say trillion or zillion dollar question. I do feel, Alex, and that's why your project is so important, that the world is in the middle of a very big change. We are at a point of inflection, and let me try to explain that. Why? Now, and in the process, I feel the leaders of the future have to deal with a multidimensional change, and that means they have to deal with multidimensional tensions in nature, in the way people relate with each other, in the way countries relate with each other, in the way we relate with the past with the future. So there are tremendous amount of tensions at work. And let me try to see whether I could quickly give you an touch up on each of this point, though this is something I could speak. I did give a speech on this for 2 hours, so I will not take 2 hours. Let me see whether I could do in a couple of minutes. At the macro level, as you know, there's a significant of geopolitical uncertainty. There are hotspots, serious hotspots from the east to the west, from the Korean Peninsula to the South China Sea, Taiwan, China challenge. People have forgotten what happened in Myanmar and Rohingya crisis. Then the Indian subcontinent has been in a continuous state of tension between Pakistan and India. Both of them have nuclear power. China has got nuclear power. There's a tension between China and India. Then you move farther west. The Middle East has been in a continuous state of uncertainty for the last 50 years. And then you go a little bit more west, you know what's going on in Europe, Ukraine-Russia war. Then we saw the challenges UK is dealing with Brexit. And then you come to United States, you know what happened in January 6th last year, and which has put democracy under microscope. Does democracy work? How civic we are to be able to participate in a democratic process. Similarly, if you look at the new spirit which is developing in many countries, in the last 50 years, we talked about globalization. Now we could talk about nationalism, nationalization. So that there's tension between those two. Do we want to go global, one humanity, one civilization, or do we want to think in terms of countries? Within countries, we are thinking in terms of silos, different types of people. Like we could see the divide within the Republican Party between far right and the center. So as you could see, there are silos. Then there's a question between democracy versus autocracy. If we look at the countries which are speaking out now, whether we look at Hungary, Turkey, China, India, even India, which is supposed to be the biggest democratic country, there's a feeling of autocracy. And when during the Trump era, we also saw a sense of autocracy. So there's a challenge now. Is democracy working, or should we go to autocracy? And democracy, as you could see, is also challenged based on what you see happened in the last 2 years. Even in the last presidential address on State of the Union, the behavior in the Congress room was below standards. People calling the president a liar, which the whole world is watching. And then there are disequilibrium in what I call the 3 E's, the equality between the wealth gap between the top of the pyramid and the base of the pyramid, not only in the United States, happening all over the world. Then you see the problem of the ecology, the second E. There's ecological disequilibrium, the climate problem. And the third E is about ethics. There's a lack of ethics. And see, the kind of people are selecting in the Congress. Without mentioning names, people lie in the name of their family, name of their background, name of the schools they've gone, and they are supposed to be people to be trusted. So I think there's a challenge of ethics. Similar, some of the corporates also have loosened ethical standards. And then we have the diffused threats and terrorism. What happened in 9/11, or what is happening here and there, mass murders, mass suicides, and all kind of such events happen at random in different parts of the world. So at the macro level, we do have some serious challenges. We cannot just say it's happening. We need a leader who could address this. And it's United Nations, the World Bank are obviously not been able to address all these challenges that we are facing at a global level. At the micro level also, I see challenges, as you could see, with the convergence of technologies, the disruptions are happening very rapidly in your space, in the space industry. Technological changes are happening very rapidly. Now, how do we manage knowledge assets versus physical assets? Most of our accounting techniques are based on accounting physical assets, but how do we account for knowledge assets, the IP of the company? And then there are new technologies which are coming in, like genomics, which leads to the question of ethical codes. How deep you want to engineer your body? Do you want to give birth to babies artificially? These are very difficult ethical questions. How do you want to treat it where the doctor has the ability to play with your genes, but genomics provides you that power today, and it will give you more power in the future. So I think society is indeed, both at macroeconomic and microeconomic level, are faced with tremendous challenge. And then to top it off, I see there's a tension between macro and micro, because at the macroeconomic level, we want companies to think of these bigger issues. But at the microeconomic level, the companies, the shareholders who are putting in money, risking their capital, they want the companies to make money. Max return on investment is the most important criteria. And this, as you know, the Wall Street literally rewards a company on the basis of the last quarter's performance. Then the stock price goes up. So we are pushing people in the corporate world, which has the power, because these are large companies like Apple, like Google, like your company, like Raytheon, like Boeing. They're large, but they are responsible to their shareholders. And the shareholders today, the Wall Street, the way it behaves, it wants records yesterday, profits yesterday. But we are dealing with challenges which need long-term solutions. So ability to think long-term is very important, but you're pushed to think short-term. So there's a fundamental tension between your ability to think long-term, and then you have to deliver short-term, and you choose the easy one because you have to survive. People would say, well, Partha, I can think of the long-term only if I survive today. And to survive today, I have to deliver short-term results. So I think we are in the middle of a pretty serious challenge. And I think that's why I do the leadership program. We need leaders who can have the courage to disconnect from the past, to create the future, and then see how to build a bridge between what Wall Street wants and what Main Street needs. And so that's a very different kind of leadership.
Yeah, definitely. Lots of challenges that we're seeing today. So how do you think that those challenges might shift in the future?
Well, if you do not address the challenges that I talk about, they will become intense. But let me step back and simplify. What does it really mean? You know, whether it's macro and micro problem, I think, Alex, the challenges are basically evolving along two vectors. Let's say the x-axis of that vector is complexity. The world is becoming more complex, whether you're talking about supply chain, management of partnerships, management of relationship between countries, within companies, management of different generations. The general shifts between one generation and next generations are becoming significantly wider. Earlier, when I joined the workforce, our goal was to adjust to our seniors, understand how they manage, and we adjust. Today, the culture is the organization has to adjust to the newest comers of the company. And the newest comers, 5 years, were very different from the people who are coming to the workforce now. And 10 years ago, they were even different. So there are layers of different generation in a company. How do you manage that? That will continue to increase. So when I step back, the complexity vector will become more complex. And the other vector is, which let's say that's the y-axis, is the knowledge intensity vector, which means businesses will become more and more dependent upon knowledge. And what does that mean? Because the technologies will evolve rapidly, new technologies will come in, which will disrupt the previous technology. So be able to deal with technological disruptions based on knowledge will become more intense. Now, what does that mean? That means the world will become on one side very uncertain and fuzzy. On the other side, that fuzziness and the uncertainty will be very complex in nature. So a great leader of the future have to deal with that shift, where it was less complex, less knowledge intensive. Now it's become more complex, more knowledge intensive, which means more disruptive on one side, and the nature of disruption is more complex. Now, to deal with that, I will go very quickly that ideal leader, you earlier asked who is an ideal leader. Now, ideal leader obviously is contextual. Leadership 100 years ago meant certain things, certain qualities. Some of them are fundamental. But leadership in the 21st century and the 22nd century could be very different, though fundamentals will be the same. Leaders have to always be ethical. They have to earn the trust. They have to motivate others. Those are common denominators. But some of the skills that leadership have to exhibit would be different. Like, I would say, they have to be more holistic. They should be able to connect many dots and have a very big picture view of the world to see all the dots. That's one, so that you can bring multiple perspectives into play. Not reject any perspective, because perspectives could be conflicting, but how to synthesize perspectives into one common theme. Second, inspire nonlinear thinking as opposed to linear thinking. Linear thinking to me means you can extend the past into the future. But in terms of disruption, you have to learn to think nonlinear. The future would be different from the past. How do I develop that perspective? That's where the intuitiveness, the intuitive capability, inductive capability of thinking will become more and more important. Then reflex, ability to manage the reflex. So suddenly certain things happen, and we were talking about the flying object going over the United States, or the balloon going over the United States. And they can all appear from any direction, not necessarily all the time. They will come from the west and go towards the east. It could come from the east, it could come from the north or south. But how do we act quickly? And that doesn't mean you have to shoot it down. But the reflex is intelligent, where to shoot, where not to shoot, and making the responses timely. Along with reflex comes resiliency. That how do we develop organization as a leader, which is resilient, which can change, make course correction very rapidly. Not brittle, but resilient. Because as you know, as organizations become big, they become brittle. They have a lot of momentum, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of systems, and they drive the company. And in the process, they become brittle and rigid. When the environment is changing, you need to be resilient. And obviously, if you are resilient, then your reflex will work. And on the other side, we have a lot of data today. A leader should be able to work with the data, have the analytical capability to come up with interesting insights, to develop new perspectives of the future. And finally, of course, the decision-making has to be significantly on one side faster, because the world is changing rapidly. Yet, you should be able to build consensus between different, if you will, quarters of a company, different organizational units of the company, so everyone is rallying behind the new decision, because no one should feel left out. So that would be the challenge, you have to quick, but you have to build consensus quickly. So, yeah, leadership in the 21st century is something that would be different. And I think that's why your project is so important, because you could now expand upon them. What does it mean And I personally feel that a leadership development program has to be thought from zero up, because what I see today, by the way, that most of the leadership programs are kind of extensions of the past into the future. We have to think in new terms, new equations.
Yeah, definitely. Great, thank you. So I'm going to shift a little bit into talking about more leadership models. There's a lot of leadership models out there. A lot of work has been done into those. But what are some leadership models that you've seen in practice, either working with clients or working with other great leaders? And how well are they working in your opinion?
That's a good question. As you know, Alex, I have worked in Japan, China, Korea, India, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Germany, Italy, and then, of course, the United States and United Kingdom, Australia to North. I think, I've seen different approaches to leadership. Now, it's a very good question, because what is a model? Now, I will make a distinction between academic model versus model that is being practiced, maybe unconsciously, but between culture driven. Now, what will impress me about Japan, and I was in Japan during the heydays of Japan in the 1980s, when Japan was absolutely top of the world, the stock market was going through the roof, everyone was talking Japan, Japanese products, Japanese brands were all over the place, whether you were talking about a wristwatch or whether you're talking about a car, they're talking about a motorbike, whether they're talking about a consumer electronics, is all Japan. Or even fashion, Hanai Mori and Issey Miyake, and even cosmetics, Kao, Shiseido. Every field, Japan ruled the world, including John Lennon's wife, Yoko, was Japanese. So Japan was all over the place. Now, Japanese style of leadership impressed me a lot. It was a leadership based on harmony, based on consensus building, based on true desire to make a difference. And that's why I think Japan was able to build so many brands in a very short period of time. Very short period, literally, I would say, between 1960 and 1975, 15 years, Japan created about, 7 dozen brands in various fields. It's not easy. I think no other country in such a short period has introduced so many brands globally, and all of the brands have a tremendous status in terms of quality. But as you know, Japan has not done so well in the last 15 years. So that's why I feel leadership is contextual. That style of leadership worked in a certain environment, but today Japan is having difficulty in the global markets to make a footprint which used to enjoy 20 years ago. Now, when I look at Europe, it is somewhere hybrid model of building harmony and being decisive. When I come to the United States, it's all about decisive. Jack Welch, once upon a time, was considered a model of leadership. But as you know, today, many people feel GE is struggling because of the decisions made by Jack Welch. But the media quickly picks up on quarterly results. And Jack Welch delivered brilliant result every quarter when he was the chairman of the company. So he was focused on the quarter, delivered it. He was considered a great leader, but in the process, he made decision which is hurting GE today. So is he a great leader? So the leadership model was decisiveness, focus on delivering results, and in the process, rally the people towards delivering what the chairman wants to deliver. While it did end up hurting GE today do not have appliances, which was GE's hardcore business, has been sold. Thomas Edison built GE on basis of bulbs and electricity. That's gone. GE used to, during Jack Welch's time, has a slogan: if you're on the bottom 10%, you have to leave the company. There will be always someone in the bottom 10, however good you are. But I feel the role of a leader is to help the bottom 10% move up, as opposed to rejecting them. So I have not seen great leadership models in practice in too many places. Because to me, the leadership model is one where you make calculated judgments, where you would not hire more people than you need, so you don't have to fire when you're not performing. And then you don't fire the weakest people, you have to help the weakest people to rise up. Now, Jack Welch's formula was every year after the performance, whoever has come at the bottom 10%, they should go. And then also here the concept, if your company is not, or factory is not competitive, you close the factory, maybe you can outsource the manufacturing to China. So this outsourcing concept, which we are now trying to make it insourcing, developed with Jack Welch, and everyone followed him because he was made a great leader by the media. But today, if you talk about Jack Welch, people say he hurt American capitalism. He hurt the American manufacturing sector. He hurt G. Stock prices indeed went up during Jack Welch's reign, but after he left, it has continuously gone down. Is that leadership? Leadership is one, as I mentioned earlier, in your presence, you inspire everyone. In your absence, that spirit continues. Right. So I have to say that the leadership models that I see at work is not working as a way it should work. Now, I can go a step deeper, Alex. You can ask why. I want to go deeper. And since you are doing this project, which I am very excited about, as you know, I think what has happened that since the development of the capitalistic system, which happened actually with the steam engine, the Industrial Revolution, which began, see what happened since then. Because of industrialization, we went into division of labor, which means people do the same thing every day. So that's what the mantra, that if you make people do what they should do every day, same, their efficiency goes up. Worked, but that led to siloed thinking. Second was what Adam Smith used to talk about, that power of self-interest. Now, which was good, because Adam Smith's thinking was when power of self-interest comes into play and they're well organized, the whole social interest is served, country's interest is served, the country becomes wealthy. That was the book which he published in 1776, The Wealth of Nations, or the full name is An Inquiry into the Causes of Wealth of Nations. Then came Charles Darwin, who wrote, as you know, The Origin of Species, and he promoted the thinking with Herbert Spencer, the survival of the fittest. And then came organizational model from the military, which is command and control, hierarchical thinking. Now, if I put these four pieces together, command and control, survival of the fittest, power of the self-interest, and division of the labor. Now you merge the two, fuse the two. Basically, you're saying you have to fight to win. If you have to win, someone has to lose. That's fine. The zero-sum game. And self-interest, when he's working with survival of the fittest, you become selfish, because you know if you do not fight to protect your interest, someone else would survive, you will die. So that very unconsciously, I feel, developed the leadership model which evolved in the 19th and the 20th century. And that spirit continues. So Jack Welch was a product of the fundamental logic of zero-sum game, that I have to be more productive. I cannot allow, the bottom 10% should move out. But there will be, then again, next year, another 10% will be at the bottom. So how do you build an organization where you reject the people who are working hard, and whoever at the bottom 10% gets rejected, that means you do not trust your people? Because next year I could be in the bottom 10%. So, And that is what I felt defined the leadership model of the 20th century, which I call the leadership model based on zero-sum logic. But what we need is a leadership model, what I call the plus-sum logic, where you bring multiple perspectives into play, synergize them to create 1 + 1 = 3. As opposed to we say we have 1, Partha, you take 0, then I can get the 1. That's a very different kind of thinking. And that is what I feel is clogging the good intentions that we all have. We're getting suffocated with a logic which is at play, maybe very unconsciously, but these are product of these 4 very different kind of forces. Division of labor means siloed thinking. Higher command and control means someone is the boss, someone is a subordinate. So you do not allow freedom of expression, though you talk about it. And then in between you have self-interest and survival of the fittest. Put it together, the answer is very simple. We have become, I would say, a victim of a model which is developed, which does not allow intelligent and enlightened synergies.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So you talked about, using multiple perspectives, and you're known for a leadership model that's based on integration of the Eastern and Western philosophies. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm glad that you have brought it up because, I got into leadership development. I'll give you a quick history. Almost by accident, but most of the things in life, as you would find out, Alex, or maybe you already found out, happened because of serendipity. And that's why I always take any opportunity with a lot of thankfulness to God. Anything, you never know what will come out of it. Now, in 1985-86, I was asked by my partner in McKinsey. I was a younger partner, but senior partner was a person very well known, Dr. Kenichi Omai, who was also the head of the McKinsey Tokyo office, and he had a very good relationship with the Prime Minister of Malaysia, then the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Mahathir, Prime Minister Mahathir, very well known. He really transformed Malaysia. We worked with him. Ken Omai developed the country strategy. I was working and leading a major effort in the oil and gas sector to develop Petronas and organize Petronas. So after the work that Dr. Omai did with the Prime Minister asked, we love your recommendations, but who would do all this? Could you guys develop a leadership program for the top CEOs of Malaysian companies, particularly those in the public sector? So Malaysian Airlines, Proton Saga, which was an automotive company, Petronas, which is an oil and gas company. They picked up about, I think it was about 60 or 70 CEOs from various companies, large and small, participated. And that's the time Dr. Omai gave me the responsibility to develop a 5-day leadership program. The reason I thinking about it right now, as you asked the question, that program was basically focused what I would call on problem solving. Because great leaders should be good problem solvers and making them familiar with what are the big trends and how should they engage with the trend to make their company successful in the global stage. Because one of the theme of the Malaysian country strategy, which Dr. Omai worked on, was making Malaysia competitive on certain sectors in the world. But since then, I got into the subject of it. That was my first exposure when I got a chance to think of leadership, and like you are working on leadership, and I developed a 5-day program from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the evening every day and these are CEOs of companies, very senior level people. Now, but since then, I started working on the subject of leadership and, being in management consulting, you get a chance to work with many leaders because they are CEOs of very companies. Now, CEO doesn't mean he's a great leader. So I don't want to qualify that. But people who were in leadership roles, I worked with them, I observed them, discuss with them different aspects, and I could see that there is a deficit of leadership, but with my due respect to all the people that I worked on, because they were thinking quite narrowly. So I started studying why so, and I did realize there's a kind of absence of the spiritual vector in leadership, because leadership is more than just being materialistic or being transactional. It is very relational. And relational doesn't mean that you have to continuously pat others to make others feel good. You have to spiritually connect with them. So I started studying both Eastern and Western philosophies, and also old Persian philosophies. So to understand, how people in the past have thought about not leadership, but what makes a good citizen. What is life all about? Now, I notice in the West, the focus, as you know, that's why the Western science and technology developed a lot, was kind of inspiration from external observations. I observed the nature, developed science. In the process, I created industries, and that's why steam engine and internal combustion engine and the microcomputer, etc., developed over time, which is important. But in the Eastern philosophy, the focus has been more on searching within. There's a universe within which you want to understand. So Western is about searching outside and understanding how Mother Nature works, with Eastern searching within. And I felt both of them are equally important. So the models I started developing, thanks to MIT, Charles West gave me, who was the president of MIT, gave me an opportunity to develop a leadership program at MIT in 2004, 2005. In that period, I worked with the MIT engineering school, and that became very successful. I conduct that. Then I took that to various corporates, and I started noticing people love it. It basically, Eastern philosophy to me is about harmony with nature, harmony with people. Western philosophy to me is being decisive, being measurement oriented, and in the process, drive the development of society or company. And I personally feel both are equally important. I'm not rejecting the West, nor am I rejecting the East. I'm saying we have to learn how to synthesize both the East and the Western philosophies. And when I think of Western philosophy, I'm thinking of people like Aristotle, Plato's thinking, people like Immanuel Kant, people like Max Muller, John Locke, the famous Scottish philosopher, and then the modern business schools, and people like Peter Drucker, which I quoted a bit earlier. That's important to understand because many of the leadership schools or programs are indeed in the United States, but are they doing justice to what I'm developing? Partially. Western philosophy, Eastern philosophy, when I think of Buddhism, Confucianism, Shintoism, Taoism, and the mother of all this is Vedikism, which developed in India about 5,000 years ago, which is called the Vedas. And Vedas, fundamental, if I reduce the Vedas into few philosophies, there are 4 Vedas which are very rich. But one is harmony with nature. Second is know thyself. Third, serve others as if they're God in every individual. If you follow these 3 principles, obviously your leadership qualities would get exhibited. You're harmonizing multiple thoughts, not rejecting anything, harmonizing with your nature. There's thinking of the climate, or thinking of how to use the agricultural fields, how to work with other people. And then if you think of know thyself, understand yourself so that you can exhibit those leadership traits. And then finally, serve others, which means that's a customer service. You treat every customer as God. Obviously, the reverence with which you will position your product, position your service would be obviously of the highest level of excellence. So that's what my leadership model basically is built on. Bring the philosophies into play at the most fundamental level. And in the process, perhaps give birth to what I was talking earlier, the plus sum logic, as opposed to zero sum logic.
Great, thank you. So you also have a leadership model about the 3 PIs. Can you talk a little bit more about that from the perspective of maybe a young executive who one day wants to become a great leader, either a CEO or a
that's a
senator?
very good question, actually. You know, when I started working on leadership in a very serious way, following the request of Charles West. He's no more, but he was one of the most enlightened academic leaders I've come across. He was one of the very few people in the academic world. He was the president of MIT, which itself is a very prestigious position. But what is very rare, that he was one of the very few individuals in the country that time, where both the Republican as well as the Democratic leadership really looked up to. By the way, after he left MIT, he became the chairman of NSF, National Science Foundation. Now, when he requested me to develop a leadership model, he made a very interesting remark to me. That Partha, when we were chatting in a flight, it seems like you've lived in many countries, you've been exposed to many faiths. He used the word faiths, Faiths. And don't you think it is your responsibility to bring it together to develop a leadership model? Because I do believe, and this was Charles West talking, that there's a fundamental deficit of leadership in the world. And a person like you, who by maybe unplanned ways, but you have been exposed to Japan, to China, to India, to Saudi Arabia, to Europe, to the United States, why don't you develop a program? So I took it very seriously. I think that was as I mentioned, many things happen in a very serendipitous way. But, I took it seriously. I started reading. And then first thing I realized that most of the leadership programs that the universities have, they just talk about leaders. So leaders are visionary, leaders are decisive, leaders are this, that. Of course, we know that. But they very rarely talk about how to become visionary, how to become good problem solvers, how to be charismatic. So I really started thinking, okay, what do the leaders do? And I realized that leaders at the end use 3 kinds of powers to influence positive outcomes. So power to influence positive outcomes depend upon 3 inner powers. So I call it the power of intellect, which is how do you use your brain power, your IQ to solve problems, and how you develop that. Because leaders are typically good problem solvers. Second, I call the power of intuition. Leaders often may not have all the facts. With limited number of facts, how do you develop your intuitive capability so that you could make a difference or make the decision? And the most important is the power of interconnectedness, that how do you connect to your inner passions, your inner universe with the inner universe of other individuals or individual, so that different 2 inner universes are in symphony with each other. And in the process, you motivate, you earn the trust. So I am basically to myself, a good leadership program should help people to develop these 3 powers. Let's not talking about what great leaders do. We all know, maybe I spent some time talking about great leaders, be it Abraham Lincoln or George Washington or Winston Churchill or Akio Morita of Sony. But what you see in them, how those got developed, they're different things. And I kind of grouped them into these 3 PIs, as you call it: power of intellect, power of intuition, and power of interconnectivity. And for each of these PIs, I have 6, 7 programs through which people could become more comfortable to use their intellectual power to solve problems, develop their intuitive capability. You may not have facts all the time, but that doesn't mean you sit on decisions, you have to make the decisions. And then, of course, power of interconnectivity is communication,
Yeah.
listening, which is connecting the dots. So that's the PI model in short, which I think is working because wherever I've used them, people loved it. People still write back to me, Partha, because of the program now, I feel I've got more intuitive power than I ever believed I will have. So it could be practiced. It could be practiced. It could be developed. What I think my leadership program does, it helps people become connected with those elements. And then if you are conscious about these elements and work with them, you see a new persona evolving. I call the radiance of leadership, or the glow of leadership.
Which one of those powers do you think is the hardest for someone to develop?
That's a good one. I think I would say the power of intuition. And I would also say maybe power of interconnectedness. And let me tell you why. Power of intuition is what you say. You should be able to make judgment calls with limited information. Now, obviously, you can always make a call, but you don't want to go in the wrong direction. So I think that is the power of that you only cultivate if you are a good reader of not the subject that you are working on, but other subjects, so you can draw parallels. Typically, people who have the power of intuition, they're good students of history. They're good students of philosophy. They are also good students of mathematics. And as a result, they develop this artistic capability to transplant ideas or thoughts from one space to another space to make the calls. And they all obviously happen sometimes in few nanoseconds, sometimes maybe over a few hours, sometimes maybe over a few days. But that could be developed, with limited information. You say that, look, today the Eagles would win. I know you're going to, looking forward to, I hope I didn't upset you when I say Eagles would win. But there would be some judgment calls made. They know the statistics. Eagles have done extremely well, I know. But Patrick Mahone is also great. But it's not only the play of two quarterbacks. People always compare quarterback. There are so many people make the difference. And somehow when I look at the nature of team work, I feel the Philadelphia team, the Eagles, are in a better shape. Though both of them are great teams. So that's what I call, I'm using the power of intuition. By looking at few dots and then connecting them. Many of them are invisible. I earlier said, leaders connect visible, invisible, and less visible dots. But that being able to sense the invisible dots more intensely is what I call the power of intuition. So that's hard, but it could be developed. And I know you are working on it, so obviously you will come up with new insights. And the power of interconnectedness is also easy to understand because we are saying how to connect with others, as Peter Drucker says, is all about communication. But a lot of it is nonverbal communication, that your inner self connects with the other person, even when you're not talking. And as soon as you appear, let's say in a meeting, your presence is felt. So I think that happens when there's an inner calm, there's an inner sense of confidence, yet humility and selflessness. So as you could see, I'm talking about many extremes, but they are play at the same time in an individual. That individual's ability to connect with others is significantly higher. If I have come to a room with only confidence and arrogance and feel superior, I think my ability to connect with individuals, even if I may be superior, even if people think I'm superior, but I will not connect with them. They would say, well, Partha is a great guy, but I do not feel as comfortable with him. But if I come as a humble student, but when I'm speaking, people can sense the confidence, the calm, yet the humility, then people's ability to connect with you becomes increasing. Now, what the program does, which I do time to time, is to help people develop that skill base. See, the other point I wanted to make, maybe it belongs here, but it came to my mind in one of the earlier questions that you raised, is that, there are two things about a great leader. One is what I would call leadership skills. People, and that's what many of the schools, like Harvard Business School, have a leadership program. They talk about communication, leading teams, conflict management. But that title itself, I find, is a bit limiting. The title should be conflict prevention. Conflict management accepts it's a zero-sum game, and you have to act as a mediator to avoid the conflict. But these are the courses which are important. I'm not saying conflict management or conflict resolution is not important, but I would also like to see that we have courses on harmony, how to take multiple views and synthesize so you can avoid conflicts, training on character, training on integrity, training on values, self-awareness, the science of self-discovery, science of self-management, self-development, science of wisdom. What is wisdom? That is to be understood. It's not just knowledge. Wisdom is about being, to be honest with you, I'm making some notes today. Let me see whether I have it. Wisdom, I felt, is where you think less about yourself and think more about the environment you're serving. And in the process, you try to use your wiser faculties to serve a situation. So it becomes only visible when you think less about yourself. And as I mentioned earlier also, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but it is thinking yourself less. So I feel these kind of elements are captured in the training programs that I offer under 3PI model.
Yeah. So what advice would you have for someone who's in a leadership role today, who's looking to harness those three powers that you mentioned before?
I face that question a lot from when I meet the CEOs. Unfortunately, I do have some friends who are at the C-level or taking, making major decisions on behalf of their companies. Now, when I develop programs at the C-level, unfortunately, they do not have too much time to go through a 5-day program, but I have developed programs for C-levels, which are perhaps 4-hour session. Now, they often ask, well, Partha, what do I need to really develop? I say that, look, you have to develop the nth sense. There's a term called sixth sense. I call it the nth sense, so that you could sense the people who are working with you without they having spoken what they are uncomfortable or comfortable with. You have to develop the sense of the environment where many of the points may not be visible. There are some weak signals which are weak today, but will become strong after a couple of months, sometimes a couple of years. You don't know, but being able to have that ability of sensing signals, internal, external, and then aligning multiple perspectives. Today, there are the chances of the world, which is becoming diverse and complex. You would be presented with multiple perspectives and sometimes opposing perspectives. Like, as you could see, for everything Biden does, there's opposition from the Republicans. But the point is not saying that Republicans are wrong and Democrats are right, or White House is right, the Congress is wrong. A good president should be able to kind of synthesize and everyone feels they've been heard, and synthesize in such a way that both parties feel good, but yet at the highest level, people would say, wow, we never thought about this situation. We need that kind of thinking for gun control. We need that kind of thinking in reducing poverty in our country, in the United States. We need that kind of control to manage the borders. But I think we have not been able to articulate in a way that everyone would find, not a compromise, everyone would find that they have been heard to the fullest. Compromise means I'm neither satisfying A nor satisfying B, come to the midpoint. That's not a solution. So for the C level, I feel developed the persona to align multiple perspectives and in the process influence positive outcomes. And to develop that, you need the end sense. And that's where the power of intuition and power of interconnectedness, which is how do I align my universe with the universes outside. And that leads to development, what I call the third eye, not eye as a capital, but there's a double meaning there. The third eye, we have two eyes, but being able to see something which others don't see. Third eye. That's basically comes from Indian philosophy. There's a third eye. You will see, in India, as you know, many of the goddesses we worship are women. We call goddess. And many of the pictures of goddess, you will see there's an eye right in the middle here. And now I understand. When I was a young kid, I didn't understand. But more and more I understand the word, I understand the significance. That wise people have the ability to see few things which others don't see. Bill Gates have that ability, even I would say Elon Musk has that ability. Many of the founders of companies, that ability. When Mark Zuckerberg got into the world of metaverse and started talking, everyone was trying to criticize him. Only 2 years ago. Today, everyone is talking in terms of metaverse. Because the normal logic may not be able to see things which extraordinary logic could see. And that's what I would suggest, how to develop that capability at the C level. Now, if you ask at the mid-level, where you are, Alex, in the mid-level executives, there also part of intuition is important, but more important is the power of, I would say, the intellect, where how do you mobilize your degrees of freedom of self-expression so that you could inspire the people around you and your seniors to do something which you believe in, as opposed to saying, well, my boss did not listen to me, or he doesn't understand what I'm saying. That's too easy to say. That's very easy to that's a very easy excuse. But as opposed to see how to craft your logic in a fashion where people who are against you or people who do not understand you will say, wow, what a great idea, let's do it together. That ability I try to develop at the mid-management level. And again, because you do not, and as an organization at the C level, you do not want to lose any IQ of any individual in the company. The top management has to ensure everyone is heard. Middle management has to ensure how they should be heard. So if both sides are working, if it is to be, it's up to me, then you will see a new type of organizational model is developed. And finally, at the youngest level, or for students, my focus on leadership model is know thyself, so that you develop the passion, the sense of ownership of what your company is all about.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So it seems to me that, your model focuses on those skills and habits that when they're nurtured and practiced, that's when the leadership qualities can get naturally exhibited. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes. You're right.
Yeah. So you talked about that you've organized quite a lot of leadership development programs. You talked about the 5-day course, maybe the shorter version of the course for those C-level professionals. But can you talk a little bit more specifically about what those programs typically entail? Because as you mentioned, a lot of leadership programs are just talk about what leadership is, what great leadership looks like, but skip that how to become a great leader. Is that more specifically what your programs look at?
That's a very good question. Typically, if I have the freedom, but when I design the program, suppose I'm working for BA says Partha, come and develop a leadership program for us for each of the levels. And by the way, we cannot afford our management to be away from work more than 3 days. 5 days we cannot afford, sorry, but 3 days we develop a program. Now, what I do before I start, I do interview people in the organization to understand the sense of how the organization works, the culture of the organization system. I do believe leadership is very contextual, as opposed to saying, well, it worked there, worked here, so it should work in BA. That would be, I feel, being a bit irresponsible. We have to be responsible. So after I've developed a fair idea, then what I do typically, the first part of the program, we talk about what's going on in the world. Because often, even at the senior management level, people do not get a chance to think of the big picture because every day you're busy with what you're supposed to do. Even at the C-level, C-level people are worried about working with the banks, working with the shareholders, working with the analysts, then obviously the internal management. And when do you really get a chance to step back? So the first couple of hours, suppose a 3-day program, the program would be talking about what are the emerging trends, exactly the kind of question you asked, and talk about each of the trends, and then discuss what does it mean for your company? What do you think the company leaders at various levels have to be able to deal with these trends so that it is beneficial for the company? So that's one, and typically programs are a mix of me speaking, more the audience speaks, the participants speak, and then ends with a small exercise. And then I bring the exercises together so a consensus develops. In view of the trends, this is what BA should be conscious about. And you'll be surprised, Alex, every time I've done with very smart companies, new concepts have evolved. Every time, without exception. So obviously there's a meaning, and that's important. So once that idea has developed that BA is about X, then comes, I move into the power of intellect. Then, given the X, how we should develop the intellectual part of the organization of each individual. So we go into the basics of problem solving, basics of how to develop a strategic logic, and how to convert the logics into visualized thoughts, visualization of thoughts. Because at the end of the day, great ideas only work when it could be visualized and understood by many people so that the whole company could rally around it. So maybe next 1.5 or 1 day is all about developing the power of intellect, which is, by the way, easiest part to develop because all of us have that in us, that we use our intellectual part to belong in some company, but give it a bit more sharper, if you will, shape so that it could be used more effectively. Then I move into the power of interconnectedness typically, which is a bit more easier compared to power of intuition, when we talk about communication from within. Now, to communicate from within, you have to understand the within first, so self-discovery. And I have got a series of exercises on that. The simple exercises do, how would you like to be honored in the next 5 years? If people talk about Alex, how would you want people to talk about you? How many times you get a chance to think about that? And I have some frameworks. that you could use to develop that. Then I said, okay, if you want to be honored that way, how do you think people are honoring you today? And what are the gaps? And then comes the question, how do you close the gaps? So that's what I call the science of self-discovery. And once you have gone through the science and art of self-discovery, then how do I get into self-expression? How do you express the inner gifts God has given you for service of society, service of people around you? So I'm giving you some high points, by the way. And then comes the power of intuition, which is perhaps the most difficult. But the way I help people to develop the power of intuition, I try to encourage systems thinking. Because by looking at multiple dots, you start thinking different. You don't need all the information, but looking outside here, there's some information here. Could you create a story? To create stories or create a narrative with limited information, you push your brain, push your mind to develop your intuitive or inductive capability. So that's where the fifth or the sixth sense or the end sense gets developed, depending upon which level of management I'm talking about. Then I have this last hour or last 2 hours. So that's why I like 5 days, because there are 5 components. But if you ask me to do it in 3 days, which is now that you have learned much more about the world and yourself, what is your agenda? So you develop your agenda of development. I sit down with them and develop and refine the agenda. Then I have what I call 21 golden rules to practice leadership, 7 or 8 for each of the PIs. So they add up to 21. And then I end with, which is very important, which comes from Vedic philosophy, practice of excellence and self-honor. At the end of the day, leadership all about practicing excellence, whatever you do, with decision-making, working with someone to mentor. How do you serve excellence? And as you know, excellence is never earned, you always search for it. And self-honor, so that ultimately leadership to me is about self-renunciation, where you make others succeed, and that's where you get the joy from, as opposed to serving yourself. Unfortunately, today, what happens, if you look at many companies, even the CEOs end up serving themselves. It should be the opposite. Serve others, make others excellent. In the process, you will get served. So I think that's his typical leadership program that I kind of do. I'm continuously refining. It's very different today than when I first started using the 3IPI model. But I know it will get refined as I work with more and more companies.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much. I think all these questions that you answered today and what you went into is a great baseline for this project that I'm working on. So I'm really excited that I got the chance to interview you. Before we go, do you have any closing thoughts or any other points that you wanted to talk about in regards to leadership in the 21st century?
That's a good question. I think, Alex, the closing thought would be that we should all believe that we are very responsible members of a big system, which is the world, the 8 billion people. So each one have a role to play. However small or big, doesn't matter. Now, people who are the CEOs of companies, they have more opportunity to influence big change. And so the message for the CEO level would be that realize the responsibility that you have, not only from the point of view of being transactional or Cartesian, that what could I do to make my results look good next quarter? It should not be only that. It should not be only myopic from the point of view of what the company does well. It has to be from the vision plane and from the relationship plane. So if I think of, typically many companies operate in a very narrow perspective, the perspective where they belong And sometimes it's good. It's good to be focused. I have nothing against it. And they are very transactional, that this is what I need to do to incent people. So there are stock options, the incentives, and that's how people get incented. And the hope is when I'm focused and when I have transactional relationship, big things will happen. They happen a little bit, but big things really don't happen. On the other side, if the relationship is based on big vision, big purpose, big meaning, which people connect with, and we have understand that we want to help others to succeed, because everyone has a desire to succeed, I think we will be able to create a better world. So that would be my thought of what I think 21st century leadership should be at all levels. It did not be right at the sea level. I think all of us are responsible. And there is a book I read every day, which is from the Vedic philosophy. It is similar to Bible, but it's called Gita, which was written in India about 3,000 years ago. There are 18 chapters. But when I think of each of the chapters, I will not go through all the chapters, but some of the chapters have a tremendous meaning. Like chapter 3's fundamental emphasis is selflessness is the only way to progress and prosperity. I think if each one of us follow that, which means connect with others first and then think of the self as opposed to opposite. That's what we typically do. That's one thing. That's chapter 3 of the Gita, by the way. Chapter 4, if I recall, talks about treat every act as an act of prayer. That to me is excellence. Think of that. Think of every act as an act of prayer. That's to me is a power of excellence, power of your inner power to do good to society. And society could mean that your company or your department or the team that you're working on. I'm not going through all the chapters, but I'm thinking of the other chapter, which I really like. I think it's chapter 7, and I'm thinking from my memory. Live what you learn. Live what you learn. So we are learning all the time. Let's practice it, which I talk about. And chapter 8 is what we talked about. Never give up on yourself. And that means you have the inner gifts. The question that you ask, are leaders born or leaders are made? Leaders, you can make yourself the leaders, but you have to believe in what you have. And you may struggle, you may fall down, but never give up on yourself. That I think is the chapter 8 of Gita, by the way. And then the other chapters, all the chapters are great, but I'm thinking from my memory. Chapter 12, I think, talks about absorb your mind in the higher level purpose. Every company has a higher level purpose. And I like, by the way, the statement that your company makes. It's beautiful. So, but how to make that real and meaningful for everyone is important. And then, of course, we touched on it many times, which I think is chapter 14, live a lifestyle. Live a lifestyle that matches your vision. So it's important to have a vision for a company, for an individual, and perfect situation is when the individual vision and the company vision are in symphony with each other. And then living it, I think, gives you a lot of satisfaction. And chapter 17, I think, talks about, which is very important, choosing the right over the pleasant. Mark the word. Choosing the right, what is right, over the pleasant, which is popular, is the real sign of power. Don't look for comfortable situations only. Work for what is right, and that is ultimately gives you the power to influence positive change. So this would be my humble thoughts in terms of closing. And of course, I believe personally, if it is to be, it is up to me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Partha. This was great to talk with you and learn more. A lot of thought-provoking questions and answers. So appreciate the time.
Alex, thank you very much. I love the questions that you raised, and I'm really looking forward to a great, I don't know what to call it, a document or a report or a thought piece or white paper, which will wake up the world. I think we need to wake up the world with the new thoughts. It's a good time, in times of inflection, new thoughts are born. So Alex, you have a tremendous responsibility. Let God give you the courage, the compassion and creativity to make a difference.